very striking, concerning advocacy. I want to talk a minute about the real world and what the obstacles are. The last time I was in India, it was in January. The day I left Delhi, the pollution was worse by far than anything I had ever experienced in Beijing. And that day, January 13th, Prime Minister Modi announced that he was considering introducing, or planning to introduce, I should say, 70% tariffs on solar panels from China. Solar panels from China is what makes renewable energy affordable and possible in India. So here you have a situation where the pollution is getting worse by the day, and you are banning what makes renewable energy possible. And by the way, making solar panels is capital intensive and worker light. So it's not an industry that India should aspire to having. It makes no sense because the cost of capital is very high in India, and India needs labor-intensive jobs. So here you have protectionism taking priority over rational policies. How do you make these environmental considerations have the priority that they need with policy makers? Who wants to tackle that question?
I think, environmental problems, the government also know about it, right? Okay, it's the policy, whether, it could be sometimes in the United States, they are talking about delegitimize the climate change. So there are still a lot of maybe doubters in this, even politics. So that could make it quite difficult for putting forward or implementing the policy, I think. But it is a real problem. It is affecting the business. And but how could we, as a researcher or from academia, to make it even clear to the politics or the government how to make it work better, I think.
I think one way we could look at it is to advertise the positives. So if I take the United States, for example, the headlines has been about withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement, but perhaps less known is that the state of New York is going to be spending $2 billion on improving its water infrastructure. And indeed, with cheap solar panels, it is going to be a facilitating renewable energy. And if more and more of these positive examples can be used, then there will be sort of public opinion that will be supporting more and more initiatives on that. And one of the things, by the way, that India is doing in the water space is to spend, I think it is about 40 billion, amongst others, in cleaning up the Ganges River. So, so there are increasing examples of which I think the community at large should start to advertise, so that the weight of the public discussion is, why aren't we doing this? I recall that when we were speaking about India, if I could come back to that, I've been a visitor to India for many years, and for many years, one of the questions that has been always asked from me is to do an India versus China contrast in the seminar, and I'll be the only Chinese in the room speaking on that. And what I noticed that has changed in the last few years is that when Modi came into power, and he came from a state that had very high economic growth. And so the whole debate changed, actually, because in the past, when you said that China grew very fast, there would be talk about, oh yes, but they're a different system and there are many things they can do there that we can't do here. But when Modi came into power, it became a discussion of, if the state of Gujarat can have high growth, why can't my state have high growth? And so I think it's important that we continuously advertise the good examples, Professor Benz talked about Japan. And Japan is an example where the government pension fund came out to fund indices that are ESG orientated. The women in the room would like to know that one of them is the Woman Empowerment Index. And that's to invest in companies that do embrace the women population in its management. So these are indeed examples that we can cite that hopefully will shift the public debate.
You know, it's interesting talking about GPIF. To me, there's an inherent contradiction in something like the government of Japan pension fund, which and indexation, which is a huge trend in the world, and then wanting to factor in ESG. You know, in your, I thought your slide on sample carbon and environmental impact reporting was very interesting. One of the things you talk about, of course, is, you know, that partly depends on the sector, you know, and the risk in utilities, et cetera. Is the best thing for investors to do to invest in these sectors and then try to influence from the inside, or say, if you're not environmentally friendly enough, we're boycotting you? Which is the more effective approach? Dr. Benz, you want to take that?
I'll try. Number one, this GPIF fund, they announced that they're increasing their ESG from 2 to 10%, so that they want 10% of their asset to be ESG focused. So that's great. And they also take an active approach in engagement, and which is actually one of the big push for ESG in Asia. So if you want the companies to improve or to integrate ESG factor into the analysis, you have to tackle the G. G goes through engagement. So we're talking from alpha engagement to beta engagement. Alpha is what the shareholder activists or hedge funds will do. Whereas beta engagement is asset manager working closely with a company, changing the way the company looking is, if they are looking at ESG, but trying to integrate ESG into their business model. So they're looking at, starting from management quality to board quality, number of independent but competent directors, looking at diversity of thinking, not just diversity of women on board. So it's a comprehensive approach to improving the company performance, and they typically will stay 3 to 5 years, and within the company. So it's not a short term; it's medium terms focus, and it does improve the company performance without having any negative impact. It's just positive or zero.
As I listen to you, an obvious question comes to mind, and I don't know which one of you wants to take it, but we in Hong Kong, you know, pay our taxes, which are low, but the Hong Kong foreign exchange, you know, reserves are huge. Should we be using our reserves as a catalyst for change more aggressively in the way you see both GIC and Temasek in Singapore, or you see GPIF in Japan? Alex, you want to take that question?
With some trepidation. So I think broadly, as part of the ecosystem that I spoke about, indeed everyone has more to do and can do more. And so starting with governments and how we fund it, but it also goes to the general public. Because I think that while the figures that Professor Benz and I show that incorporating ESG does lead to better performance over the medium term, or you should incorporate it as a risk management tool. Basically, we believe that you make a more holistic decision when you incorporate ESG into your considerations. But let's assume that there's a year where the Hong Kong Monetary Authority reports that our returns are lower this year, because of certain ESG considerations. Will you, as the Hong Kong public, accept that? And in the short term, there was a short-term price for that. And if the Hong Kong public is saying that if in the longer term it supports our goals to be environmentally friendly and to incorporate ESG, and on a year-to-year basis we are prepared to accept variations, I think this will send a strong message to the relevant authorities that this is something we must support.
Thank you so much. Paula, I'm going to turn to you now and ask you a double-barreled question. To what extent is government naturally the catalyst for change? And if so, what are the constraints on the Hong Kong government, do you feel? As I was getting up to speed for this panel, Michelle gave me a wonderful report on green cities, and it's kind of dismaying to see how low Hong Kong ranks, below Shenzhen, Guangzhou, Beijing, Shanghai, Tokyo, Seoul. Paula.
That is double-barreled, especially since I don't live here. But, with regard to the role of government, I would normally say, because we're talking about a public good, there is a natural requirement for government to be the leader, the guider, the superintendent, the catalyst, the protector of the public interest. Because in the end, the goal, certainly if we're talking about climate change, is to reduce emissions in the atmosphere. It's a physical question. It has to happen. The atmosphere does not care how it happens, nor does it care why. Same with water contamination. As I said to Professor Benz's class yesterday, water wants to be clean. It does not want to be dirty. And it doesn't care how it gets clean. It just wants to be clean. So who is going to be the keeper of the flame for the public has to be government. Now, back to your first question, is why is public policy a little bit slow to move? I think it's because the issues have become overly complicated, and one way of drawing in more people and to get the Hong Kong public, as it were, to respond to Alex's question, is for everyone to sort of begin to redefine the environmental issue as a core question, that it is not a side dish, it is not something separate from your daily operations. And I think we all do ourselves a disservice by we keep on talking about this as an environmental issue, because what's happened, and what I think that these panels show, is that while we were sort of all advocating, capital markets kind of have gotten on with it. They have developed all these products. The products are showing performance. There are growing ESG departments in the major financial institutions of the world, in the pension funds. So the evidence is there, the momentum is there, and somehow the capital markets have gotten in front of policy. Very counterintuitive. So the public policy role now is to bring the public along. And last night I gave a talk and I asked, the audience how many people were involved in this or that fund or this or that thing. And nobody seemed to have any financial investment in anything. And I said, who has bank accounts? And then, of course, everybody put their hands up. And I mean, maybe one role for Hong Kong also is a financial literacy is so low around the world. Maybe a green financial literacy institute to bring the public along. Because I think when the question that Alex would be put to the public would be a little hard-pressed to say, yes, I'll take those lower returns. But that's because, we haven't required the vision to say that the alternative is to lose out on public health, to see more pandemics, all these other non-financial factors. The public needs to think of them as financial.
Exactly. Thank you so much. Norman, I'm going to ask you one question, and then I'm going to turn it over to all of you in the audience. We had a data point that China's cleaning up its environment will be $1 trillion a year. Hugely expensive. And I was impressed by the vibrancy in China about the debate about how we price things. When we're pricing cheap exports, right, that doesn't include the cost of cleaning up. And how do we calculate these things more properly? There's also been this pattern, in emerging markets, we'll develop first and clean up later. Two questions. Is there a point at which it just becomes so ridiculously expensive that it's almost a tipping point?
Well-
I'll just leave you with that because we're running out of time.
Well, I think it is not actually, difficult. But the problem is, it's relative. Even though in China you can put a price on the rubbish you throw away, for example, it is possible to get it done. And but it's what's the second question?
I decided because I want to have
Yeah,
audience
yeah.
have
So I think,
time.
it is possible to price it in Hong Kong, in China, to make it work, and then to reduce the wastes, reduce the carbon dioxide going up. And that is the environmental risk to all these problems, and then affecting not only green bond, but also the risk assessment in the reinsurance as well.
Thank you so much. Now I would like to throw it open to anyone who has a question, and if there's somebody that you specifically wish to direct it to, please let us know. And first you.
Thanks. This is Melody. I have a question for Alex. What is the most difficult part that you see in ESG investing, especially when you compare like Asia to investing in Asia versus Europe and US, given in Asia the data transparency is not so high? And sorry, a bit greedy, I have a second question as well. There are lots of ESG data to assess those companies. So how do you use it given there are so large amount of overwhelming data?
Yes. Right. Right. In fact, you've almost given the answer to the question in that data availability is one of the key limiting factors. And that's why I particularly highlighted the good initiative that Hong Kong Exchange has done to require, comply, and explain on ESG, and to move towards GRI standards on reporting on ESG. And I think we need to move increasingly towards that for Hong Kong and the rest of Asia. And in terms of having a proliferation of data, indeed, there's lack of data and there is the availability of reliable data and too much data. And one of the ways that we're looking at doing this is how can we use big data to our advantage on that. So when you have a lot of data that's coming in by various sources, you could also use it to cross-check information that's coming across. But nothing beats engagement with the companies to better understand. And here I want to come back on the importance of engagement in Asia. Because we see exclusion as the failure of engagement. And so we look to engage with companies to ensure that we are moving in the right direction, then rather than making statements as to whether we exclude or include. And just to show the power of that, there's an oil palm company that, if you think of palm oil plantations, the products that they sell, the renewable palm oil is traded at hardly any premium to ordinary palm oil. But yet, companies, many good listed companies pursue the production of sustainable palm oil. Why? And the company said, it's because even though I'm not selling the product for more, but my investors will not invest in my company if I don't. And that's so powerful, coming back to the point of why asset owners have to come behind this deal. Yeah. So we're seeing good developments in Asia, but indeed more quality data would be good.
You know, one of the heartening things for me is to see how drones, from international sources can compensate for inadequate data in a country. So in India, there are many parts of India where there's no accurate real-time measurement of rainfall. And that has implications for crop insurance, for example.
Yeah.
And there's a very interesting professor at Hong Kong U who is tracking the trajectory of disease and correlating it with global warming using drones. For example, there was a question over here.
Sorry. Excuse me, sorry. Hello, it's Cable TV Nika. I would like to ask Alex, and since many speakers has mentioned that Hong Kong is now very developed in stocks, bonds, and also financial markets. Green finance is now attracting more and more attentions from the investors. But I think now the investors may also concern one of the questions is that Hong Kong currency that seems like overselling of the Hong Kong's currency after intervention by HKMA. Is the outflow of capital from Hong Kong getting more and more serious? Have you any advice for the investors?
I think that is irrelevant to this, and we're running out of time.
Answer it.
Maybe afterwards.
Short verse, speak some of that.
Maybe you can ask him afterwards. This has nothing to do with the topic at hand, and we're a bit late, so I'll take one more question if there is one. Thank you.
Maya D'Souza, the Business Environment Council. So thanks for really interesting presentations, and I think we're all agreed here that Hong Kong can and should be a regional green finance hub. But I wanted to come to the question of what exactly needs to be done to get there, because we've heard lots of, a few ideas from the government. We've heard about ESG. We've got a bit of a picture about what this green finance hub would look like. But what seems to me to possibly be missing is a program or a real strategy that picks up all the different things that need to be done, from ensuring there's a pipeline of projects. If there's no green BRI, there are not that many projects. We need to have projects here in the GBA. We need to have all the different instruments, so from green bonds to having things like green investment banks, and also we have to have the buy side, the asset owners, the investors really buying the right products. So my question is, this is a complex program that we need that involves lots of different departments, government bureau, government departments, even people like Hong Kong X. How can we get this going quickly enough so that Hong Kong actually catches the wave? Otherwise it may just be too late. Oh, actually, whoever wants to answer it, maybe.
Okay, coming from academia, I'm not really familiar with the policy issues, but on the SFC side, like I said before, from the various surveys I've seen, they all agree that ESG is risk management, but in terms of implementation, it's very comprehensive. There are limited data. They don't know where to start. So if the SFC can make it easier for the companies to report on key financial material ESG, that's already a big step, because then the company can see what is important for their core business as well. From another one is on a governance disclosure. Governance is a big thing in Asia, big problem. So how do you get companies to disclose more on a board level, on a management quality, on a pay, etc. So if you have more data on the governance, that's already very helpful for the asset owners and asset managers as well to engage with the company, as well for the investors, right? Another one for the bond that I think is relevant is to make the certification program easier and more, not just easier, but more robust, more compliant to the international standard. Because if you want Chinese companies to list in Hong Kong, right? And the reason behind is because they want to have more foreign international investor base. That's one of the biggest drivers of green bonds, having a large investor base behind. Then make it easier and as well as credible green certification standardization. So you collaborate with other institutions on this base, but make Hong Kong very robust in that prospect. So that's already an attraction point for that. Others may follow.
And I think in aligning to that, actually, two things. One is the financial institutions, the risk management of this. You talk about ESG, the green bond, but still the risk, environmental risk particularly. Second is the cooperation. I have to reiterate again, is the cooperation between the government, business sectors, and academia to make it faster, to make it work. So that is what I think.
Paula, you want to add anything?
Just back to this idea of the value chain, you know, that you can't do ESG in isolation. Neither can you do policy in isolation. Neither can you do science in isolation. Neither can you do any of these things in isolation. And so Hong Kong, it may not be a framework that's necessary, an official framework. It may be sort of a consortium approach where you identify 10 needed items. I mean, you know, and that includes high net worth individuals. There's a tremendous amount of energy in Hong Kong now. I'll take a moment to mention one of them. The RS Group has a sustainable finance initiative, a very, very important example that they will be talking about more later on to influence and show best practice to their peer group, family offices. I think it may not be an official framework. It may be just trying to link up better all the things that are going on and to identify the breakthroughs that are necessary to broadcast those things.
Okay, one line quickly.
Yeah. And as we speak, there's going to be a Hong Kong Green Finance Association that will be established. And this association would work very closely with China as well. That will be, as we know, a huge issuance of green products.
And I just want to wrap out with one short anecdote and just remind you all that as individuals, you all can make a difference as well. I was in Shanghai last year, and I met an architect who had come to Shanghai from Canada and became obsessed with indoor pollution. And he put up a website with all the materials that are carcinogenic. And I introduced him to Blackstone, which is a company that I write about a lot. And Blackstone is using his information and applying it to the office buildings in India, and they are the largest owner of office buildings in India, and Hilton Hotels, which they also own. So the indoor pollution will be less a factor in all these things. And I'm so proud that I could use my network in that small, small way. I'd like to thank Civic Exchange and all of you for coming today. Please stay for more drinks, and please follow up with Alex on what he thinks about the weakness of the Hong Kong dollar. Thank you all very much.